J'étais tout seul, je l'ai droguée dans la chambre. Je l'ai attachée, je l'ai traînée hors de la chambre, j'ai vérifié qu'elle était bien morte en la noyant, j'ai traîné cette hors de la maison jusqu'au garage. Je l'ai mise dans un baril de 210 litres, j'ai posé le couvercle dessus, mis le cerceau et j'ai tout vissé.
On se sent profondément trahi quand on s'aperçoit que la personne en qui on avait le plus confiance est celle qui vous fait le plus de mal. J'ai l'impression que si mon père donnait les détails sur ce qui s'est passé, ça me permettrait de tourner la page et de mieux comprendre.
Je suis enfermé depuis bientôt 18 ans. Et c'est que le début.
Interview de Mike Fogt. Première prise. Clap.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous avez fait?
Je m'en souviens pas très bien.
Je crois que si.
Je crois que non.
Donc, vous avez fait beaucoup de victimes?
Oh oui.
Racontez-moi, c'est intéressant.
Vous racontez quoi? Je veux pas finir sur la chaise électrique.
Je veux savoir les détails. Michelle veut savoir les détails.
C'est une photo de moi bébé, avec ma mère et mon père. Ma mère s'appelait Martha Perry, mais elle se faisait appeler Marty. Si je devais résumer en un mot ce que m'évoque cette photo, mensonge est le mot le plus juste. Tout a changé en 8 ans. De cette photo d'une famille heureuse au chaos absolu. C'est difficile à expliquer pour moi, car je souffre d'un trouble appelé l'alexithymie, qui est une difficulté à reconnaître ou ressentir des émotions. Ça fait partie de la réaction liée au stress post-traumatique et au meurtre. Il y a 2 versions du même homme dans ma tête. Celle-ci, c'est Michelle Fogt, mon père. Il m'emmenait partout. Et pour moi, enfant, il était mon univers. L'autre version, c'est Michelle Fogt, le tueur. J'ai jamais voulu voir les 2 versions de mon père. Car si j'acceptais de regarder ce que je ressens au quotidien, je serais dans un état pitoyable en toute sincérité. Je me souviens d'avoir toujours été très attachée à ma mère. Je me rappelle un jour en particulier, quand j'étais petite. On s'est allongé sur une couverture dans le jardin. Le ciel était bleu avec seulement quelques nuages. On est resté là à prendre le soleil. Et j'étais la plus heureuse du monde, allongée à côté de ma mère. Je ne l'ai eue dans ma vie que pendant une période très courte.
Ça suffit, Mike. J'en ai marre!
Je me souviens qu'ils se disputaient souvent et que je devais quitter la pièce.
Tu devrais pas me tenir tête comme ça.
Ne me dis pas ce que j'ai à faire.
J'avais souvent peur. La plupart du temps, ils se contentaient de se crier dessus. Et mon père, lui, courait après.
Continue comme ça, tu vas voir.
Je décrirais leur relation, d'après mes souvenirs, comme étant toxique. Un jour, ma grand-mère m'a demandé d'aller chercher son courrier. Je devais attendre qu'elle soit rentrée chez elle pour le lui apporter. Je suis allée chercher le courrier et mon grand-père a voulu que je le lui donne. J'ai répondu non, que ma grand-mère m'avait demandé de le garder pour elle. Il s'est énervé et s'est mis à crier que je devais lui donner ce fichu courrier.
Tu veux jouer les malignes, hein? Arrête tout de suite, je te préviens.
Il m'a giflé si fort sur la jambe que j'avais la marque de sa main parfaitement nette, rouge et enflée sur ma cuisse.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe ici?
Mon père n'était pas content que mon grand-père m'ait frappé, surtout pour une histoire de courrier que je ne voulais pas lui donner. Ça a dégénéré. Mon grand-père s'est retrouvé collé au mur et mon père a enfoncé son poing dans la cloison, à environ 10 cm de la tête de mon grand-père. Je n'avais jamais vu mon père être aussi violent. Et ça m'a fait peur. Mon père faisait partie d'un gang de motards. J'étais entourée de gens susceptibles d'être des criminels. J'ai pas très envie de parler de ça. Je suis pas très à l'aise. Si je dis quelque chose de travers, ça pourrait mal tourner.
Entre là-dedans.
Aïe, tu me fais mal! Je me rappelle qu'un jour, mon père m'a dit de me coucher par terre dans la salle de bain. Quelqu'un tirait sur la maison. Il a jeté des couvertures, des vêtements et des oreillers sur moi. Et il m'a dit de ne pas sortir de la salle de bain sans son autorisation. J'avais très peur. J'essayais de me coller au sol le plus possible, mais j'étais déjà couchée par terre. Je ne pouvais pas me faire plus petite. Ça m'a semblé durer une éternité. J'entendais les battements de mon cœur résonner dans mes oreilles.
Avez-vous déjà vu votre père avouer avoir tué votre mère?
Je n'ai jamais vu les aveux que mon père a fait à la police. Tout ce que je sais, c'est qu'on m'a rapporté.
Alors allez-y, appuyez sur la barre d'espace.
C'est quoi son nom?
Martha Fogt,
Martha. Elle est née où?
à Erlanger, dans le Kentucky.
Martha était votre ex, la mère de Michel.
C'était encore ma femme, on n'a jamais divorcé.
Vous l'avez étouffée ou vous l'avez noyée dans la baignoire?
Je sais pas, je voulais être sûr.
La baignoire, c'était pour être sûr qu'elle soit morte.
Ouais.
Ça ne pourrait pas être plus délibéré que ça. Quel abruti. C'est pas vrai. Je m'attendais pas à ça. Je pensais pas ressentir quelque chose. Je pensais simplement écouter et comprendre. C'est pas vrai.
Vous regrettez d'avoir regardé?
J'ai pas de regrets, ça m'aide. C'est toujours une torture de revivre tout ce processus, mais c'est pire certains jours. J'espère qu'il pourra m'aider à m'approcher de la vérité.
Votre femme, vous m'avez dit où elle était.
J'ai eu un coup de génie ce jour-là. Personne pourrait croire qu'il y a quelqu'un là-dessous, c'est moi qui vous le dis. C'est pas quelque chose dont je devrais être fier, mais mon cerveau marche comme ça.
Je voudrais savoir la vérité. Il a toujours refusé de parler des meurtres avec moi.
Vous pensez qu'il répondra à mes questions?
J'espère qu'avec une autre personne que moi, mon père acceptera de répondre à des questions. Oui.
Bonjour. Cet appel provient d'un centre pénitentiaire et est susceptible d'être écouté et enregistré. Pour accepter l'appel, appuyez sur 0.
Allô?
Comment ça va?
Très bien. Vous avez reçu mon email?
J'en ai reçu un la semaine dernière qui disait que vous aviez parlé à ma fille. Le directeur adjoint m'a réveillé ce matin pour me dire qu'une dame de la télé voulait venir me parler. Il m'a demandé si j'étais d'accord pour être interviewé, et j'ai dit oui.
Écoutez, si je viens vous voir pour faire cette interview, qu'on se met d'accord et que je fais venir mon équipe, je vais vous poser des questions sur ce que vous avez fait.
D'accord, mais vous devez comprendre que je peux plus mentir.
C'est une photo de ma mère en train de sourire. Je ne me souviens pas de l'avoir vue beaucoup sourire. Je ne me souviens pas du son de sa voix. Je ne me souviens pas de l'odeur de ses cheveux. Mais si mon père ne l'avait pas tuée, je n'aurais pas besoin de me souvenir du son de sa voix. Je suis allée dans le jardin jouer à la balançoire. Peu de temps après, mon père et ma mère ont commencé à se disputer.
Comment t'as pu être aussi bête? Tais-toi!
J'ai entendu une pluie d'insultes. Ils se disputaient, se criaient dessus et se couraient après.
T'as signé notre arrêt de mort!
Je suis restée sur la balançoire pendant une éternité. Et soudain, plus rien. Le silence. Un peu plus tard, il est sorti et il a dit que ma mère était partie. Mais je ne l'avais pas vu partir. Mon père m'a dit qu'il m'emmenait chez mes grands-parents pour quelques jours. En partant, je me souviens qu'il a sorti un baril du garage pour me laisser passer. Il réparait des voitures dans le garage, donc ça n'avait rien d'inhabituel de voir des barils traîner à la maison. Et on est parti. On n'a pas vraiment pensé à signaler sa disparition. Ma mère avait l'habitude de partir pendant quelques jours ou même quelques semaines, mais elle finissait toujours par revenir. Personne n'a trouvé ça vraiment bizarre. Mon père nous a dit qu'elle était quelque part dans l'Ohio, qu'elle allait bien, mais qu'elle ne rentrerait pas tout de suite. Je l'ai cru. Je ne posais pas souvent de questions sur la raison de ses absences ou sur l'endroit exact où elle se trouvait. Je voulais simplement trouver un moyen de la faire revenir. Je m'accrochais à mon rêve d'enfant de faire de la musique. Je me disais que si j'arrivais à faire carrière dans la musique, ma mère finirait par revenir me chercher. Mon père m'a dit que ça ne marcherait pas. Mais j'étais convaincue que si j'étais riche, elle reviendrait. Mon père m'a répondu que non. Il n'a pas voulu en dire plus et a très vite mis un terme à la conversation. J'ai toujours eu l'impression qu'elle m'avait abandonnée. Je pensais qu'elle était partie délibérément, qu'elle m'avait laissée et n'en avait rien à faire de moi. Mon père a commencé à fréquenter Cynthia Pickens. On l'appelait Cindy. Pendant les grandes vacances, j'allais passer quelques jours ou même une semaine avec mon père et Cindy. Je me souviens surtout des moments qu'on passait à discuter devant la maison. C'était rafraîchissant. On restait assises là, toutes les deux, à discuter et à profiter du moment. Mon père m'a expliqué qu'il s'était disputé avec elle, qu'il l'avait jetée dehors et lui avait dit de partir. Ça paraissait normal pour lui de se lasser de ses compagnes et d'en changer souvent. Je pense que j'étais trop jeune pour me dire que c'était peut-être pas une coïncidence que ma mère ait disparu sans laisser de traces et que Cindy ait disparu de la même manière. Le 15 mars 2005, mon père était en prison pour délit de menace en attendant son procès. On a vu aux informations qu'un corps avait été retrouvé dans un garage. L'endroit me disait vraiment quelque chose et je me souviens d'avoir pensé que ça ressemblait au garage de mon père. Quand les policiers sont arrivés pour jeter un œil, ils ont vu un trou dans le sol, recouvert de gravier. Dans le trou, ils ont trouvé des restes humains.
Bonjour. Cet appel provient d'un centre pénitentiaire et est susceptible d'être écouté et enregistré. Pour accepter l'appel, appuyez sur 0.
Comment ça va?
Très bien, et vous? Ça fait longtemps. J'ai du nouveau. J'ai contacté la direction de la prison et on est autorisé à venir vous interviewer.
Écoutez, je suis un sale. Je vais vous hurler dessus, vous raccrocher au nez, vous traiter de tous les noms. Mais jamais je vous mentirai. Cette voulait ma peau.
Vous l'avez étranglée?
Disons, ouais, ça s'est fini comme ça. Je l'ai peut-être poignardée aussi, elle doit être morte.
Vous auriez dû vous livrer.
Et j'aurais dû, ouais. Mais je suis un enfoiré et j'assume.
La police a réussi à identifier le corps de Cindy. Mon père avait dû enterrer Cindy dans cette petite fosse dans le garage. après l'avoir tué. Environ 2 jours après avoir trouvé le corps de Cindy, la police est venue chez mes grands-parents. Des officiers ont commencé à creuser la dalle devant leur maison. Et ils ont fouillé l'endroit où du béton avait été coulé. Ils ont trouvé un baril de 210 litres. Quand mon père a avoué avoir tué Cindy, il a aussi dit à la police avoir tué ma mère. Il a indiqué l'emplacement du corps qui se trouvait dans un baril de 210 litres, enterré sous une dalle.
Martha était votre ex, la mère de Michel. Comment elle a atterri dans ce baril?
J'étais tout seul, je l'ai mise dans le baril de 210 litres, j'ai posé le couvercle dessus et je l'ai fermé avec le cerceau.
C'est le baril dans lequel ma mère a été enterrée. Ça a déclenché des émotions très mitigées. J'étais surtout sous le choc de découvrir une chose pareille. Je ne savais pas quoi penser.
C'est comme ça. Tu comprends?
Ça s'est pas fait. On voulait pas que ça se termine comme ça. Personne ne voulait ça, sincèrement. Le fait que tu aies tué ma mère et fait la même chose à Cindy, c'est pas quelque chose qu'on peut simplement effacer.
Écoute, je veux pas parler de ces histoires, parce que tout ce que tu vas faire, c'est m'engueuler et me prendre la tête. C'est bon.
Je voudrais savoir pourquoi il s'est senti obligé de tuer ma mère. Pourquoi il s'est senti obligé de tuer Cindy et pourquoi il a caché les corps. Je lui ai demandé. J'ai passé des années à hurler pendant 15 minutes à chaque fois que je l'appelais en prison. Il en a eu marre de se faire crier dessus, alors on n'en parle presque plus. Si vous arriviez à obtenir des réponses de mon père, je serais vraiment très impressionnée.
J'ai parlé avec Michelle ces derniers jours.
D'accord.
Elle m'a transmis beaucoup de questions à vous poser.
D'accord.
Est-ce que vous êtes prêt à entendre ce qu'elle a besoin de savoir?
Ouais,
D'accord. Je parle pour Michelle, d'accord?
ça vaut mieux.
Je fais seulement ce qu'elle m'a demandé de faire.
Ça vaut mieux.
Ça vaut mieux.
Ça vaut mieux.
Michelle veut savoir les détails. Elle cherche des réponses. Parlez-moi du jour où vous avez tué sa mère.
Ça a commencé comme n'importe quel autre jour. On s'est engueulé, ça a dégénéré et je l'ai étranglé. Je sais pas quel détail macabre vous voulez de plus.
Ce n'est pas moi qui veux tout savoir. C'est votre fille.
Écoutez, j'en sais rien. Je me souviens pas de tous les détails. Je l'ai tué. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez de plus?
Je veux que vous disiez la vérité, étape par étape, sur ce que vous lui avez fait ce jour-là. Du salon à la salle de bain, jusqu'au baril.
Je m'en souviens pas très bien.
Je crois que si.
Je crois que non.
Pourquoi c'est si dur de me le dire?
J'en sais rien, madame le procureur.
Est-ce que vous pouvez tout me raconter avec le plus de détails possible? Faites-le pour Michelle, parce qu'elle a besoin de savoir. Allez-y.
D'accord, je l'ai tuée, je l'ai droguée dans la baignoire. Elle était morte, c'est sûr. Je l'ai mise dans le baril, j'ai posé le couvercle dessus, j'ai mis le cerceau et je l'ai vissé.
J'ai un souvenir qui correspond, je crois, à la dernière fois qu'elle était en vie. C'était le jour où ils m'ont demandé de rester dans le jardin sur la balançoire. Je voudrais que mon père me confirme que c'était bien ce jour-là. C'est essentiel pour ma santé mentale. Ça me permettrait d'avancer.
Elle est allée dans le jardin faire de la balançoire. C'est le jour où vous avez tué sa mère?
Non.
Comment vous pouvez en être sûr?
Quand j'ai tué sa mère, elle était chez des amis depuis plusieurs jours.
Je crois avoir vu ma mère à un certain moment. J'ai un souvenir que mon cerveau a bloqué jusqu'à ce qu'on découvre son corps. Mon père a poussé le baril sur le côté pour me laisser entrer dans le garage. En passant à côté, je crois avoir vu le corps de ma mère à l'intérieur. J'ai vu des cheveux qui ressemblaient à des cheveux et de la peau, juste sous le couvercle du baril.
C'est jamais arrivé. Vous laisseriez votre gosse voir un cadavre? Non, et moi non plus. Arrêtez, c'est ridicule. Elle a peut-être vu le baril, mais pas le corps. Le couvercle était vissé dessus avec le cerceau.
D'accord. Alors pourquoi elle se souvient d'avoir vu sa mère?
J'en sais rien. Peut-être qu'elle se sent coupable et se dit qu'elle aurait dû voir et qu'elle a rien vu. Ou qu'elle a vu, mais qu'elle a rien fait. Vous comprenez? Vous laisseriez votre gosse voir un cadavre? Non, et moi non plus. Arrêtez, c'est ridicule.
Je sais que ma mémoire ne me trahit pas. J'ai vu ma mère dans ce baril. Au début, il essaie de rester calme et posé. Puis, il se met à ricaner. Il sait qu'il raconte n'importe quoi. Pour moi, il ment. Ça ne fait aucun doute. Mon père m'a dit qu'il avait voulu faire une dalle chez mes grands-parents pour les aider à rejoindre la porte sur le côté de la maison sans qu'ils aient à descendre sur la pelouse. Mon père m'avait demandé de rester à l'intérieur et il a ajouté de ne pas regarder par la fenêtre. Mais comme j'étais très curieuse, j'ai jeté un œil dehors. Je ne savais pas comment on construisait une dalle. Alors, quand j'ai vu mon père mettre un baril sous le béton, j'ai pensé que ça faisait partie du processus. En réalité, il a caché le corps de ma mère en prétendant faire quelque chose pour aider mes grands-parents. Mais c'était pour dissimuler son crime.
J'ai emmené le baril avec le corps de Marty sur un terrain que je louais pour entreposer des voitures et des camionnettes. Avec des pneus, des caravanes et des bateaux. Je l'ai laissé là quelques mois.
Jusqu'à quand?
Jusqu'à ce qu'il fasse moins chaud et que je puisse couler le baril dans le béton. J'ai coulé du béton sur le baril.
Vous aviez tout planifié.
Dans la même situation que moi, vous auriez aussi cherché des moyens d'échapper à la prison. Personne n'a envie d'aller en prison.
Le jour où vous avez emmené le baril avec le corps de Marty chez vos parents, Michelle se souvient que vous lui avez dit de rester à l'intérieur et de ne pas regarder par la fenêtre.
C'est possible.
Elle est persuadée d'avoir vu ce baril.
Elle était dans la maison, je ne sais pas dans quelle pièce. Si elle est allée dans la chambre de ma mère, la fenêtre donnait directement sur l'endroit où j'étais.
Pourquoi avoir choisi la maison de vos parents?
Je ne sais pas pourquoi. Sans doute parce qu'ils voulaient que je coule cette dalle. Et qu'il y avait la place d'y mettre le baril. Je ne savais pas quoi en faire et je savais que je risquais d'aller en prison bientôt pour une histoire de drogue. D'une certaine façon, je voulais savoir où elle était enterrée. C'était une forme de contrôle. C'est le meilleur endroit que j'ai trouvé à ce moment-là pour cacher le corps de Marty. C'était le bon endroit au bon moment, c'est tout.
Pourquoi vous avez tué sa mère?
Marty était une balance. Quand on est dans un gang de motards, on n'est pas des enfants de cœur. On distribue pas des gâteaux et des Barbies aux gamins. Les motards font aujourd'hui ce que le crime organisé faisait il y a 50 ans. Sa mère allait tous nous faire tuer, moi et ma famille. Un mec qui traînait avec nous avait photocopié des documents pour le shérif du comté de Clermont. Et il m'avait montré qu'elle balançait. Sur tout le monde. Tout ça pour échapper à une condamnation. Sans ça, elle serait tombée pour trafic de drogue. Si quelqu'un dans notre entourage, notre femme, notre gamin, notre frère, notre sœur, commençait à poser des questions, il fallait s'en occuper. Point barre.
Et qu'est-ce que vous avez fait?
Comment ça? Vous savez très bien ce que j'ai fait, je l'ai tué. Je sais pas si je l'avais prémédité, mais je l'ai tué.
C'est encore plus dur d'apprendre que ce n'était pas une dispute qui a mal tourné, mais qu'il s'agissait d'un acte délibéré. J'ai toujours espéré que l'entendre admettre qu'il l'avait tué me permettrait de tourner la page. C'est une forme d'explication, mais ça ne suffit toujours pas à justifier son geste. Je ne sais pas quand mon père est devenu ce qu'il est aujourd'hui. Mais l'homme sur cette vidéo n'est pas quelqu'un que j'ai envie d'appeler papa. Mon Dieu, c'est pas vrai.
Les gens croient que je n'ai pas de conscience, mais c'est fou. C'est pour ça que j'ai rien dit pour Marty. Je voulais pas que ma fille croie que sa mère ne voulait pas d'elle. Bien sûr que Michelle se sent orpheline. C'est horrible ce que j'ai fait. Et elle y est strictement pour rien. Je veux qu'elle le sache. Je lui ferai des excuses tous les jours, s'il le faut. Parce que je suis désolé. C'est ma fille et je l'aime très fort. Le jour de sa naissance était le plus beau jour de ma vie. Et je suis très fier de ce qu'elle est devenue. Ce dont je rêve le plus au monde, c'est de pouvoir garder mon petit-fils pendant que ma fille est au travail. Je rêve pas de moto, de femme ou de drogue. Ni de faire la une des journaux, rien de tout ça. Si je pouvais faire table rase du passé, c'est là que je voudrais être. J'espère que tout ça lui permettra de retrouver la paix. Vous l'avez sans doute aidé à aller au fond des choses. Et je vous en remercie, parce que j'ai l'impression que peut-être ça pourrait l'aider à guérir. Si c'était à refaire, je le referai jamais. Je suis désolé, papa t'aime.
Il était sincère. Je le crois quand il dit qu'il voudrait voir mon fils. Mais j'aurais aimé qu'il ne fiche pas sa vie en l'air au point de se priver de ses petits-enfants.
Je regrette vraiment d'avoir tué la mère de Michelle. J'aurais préféré que ça n'arrive pas. Mais on ne peut pas revenir en arrière. Il y a une ligne à ne pas franchir et si on le fait, c'est trop tard. Ça marche pas comme ça. On peut pas faire machine arrière. J'ai complètement foiré ma vie et c'est pas arrivé du jour au lendemain, c'est arrivé petit à petit. À une époque, je disais que je ferais jamais un truc pareil. La victime, c'est ma fille. Elle n'a plus de mère ni de père. C'est elle, la victime. J'adorais ma gamine et je l'aime toujours. Mais j'ai eu le courage d'avouer ce que j'avais fait. Vous savez à quel point c'est dur de faire ça? Vous savez à quel point c'est dur? Vous avez une petite idée. Une petite idée. Sérieusement.
Aidez-nous à comprendre ce qui s'est passé. Vous étiez un père aimant qui adorait sa fille, mais aussi un mari.
Pas très longtemps.
Quoi, ça a une importance?
2 ou 3 mois.
D'accord. Donc, comme vous n'étiez marié que depuis 2 mois, vous aviez le droit de la tuer.
Non. J'avais pas le droit de la tuer. Qu'est-ce que vous racontez? Vous êtes cinglé?
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer ça? Est-ce qu'on vous a déjà demandé comment on peut être, vous savez, une certaine personne un jour et le lendemain tuer sa femme?
Je me suis souvent posé la question.
Est-ce qu'on peut parler de Cynthia? On va parler de Cynthia. Vous l'avez poignardée et quand elle est morte, vous avez pris une bâche.
Je l'ai enroulée dans une bâche. Je l'ai emmenée au garage et je l'ai mise dans un trou.
Elle ne méritait pas mieux?
Bien sûr que si, tout le monde mérite mieux. Tout le monde mérite mieux. Je J'assume l'entière responsabilité de mes actes. J'étais pas obligé de tuer qui que ce soit. Ce sont pas les seules personnes que j'ai tuées. Si on en croit certains services de police, j'aurais tué 35 hommes et 2 femmes. Je trouve qu'ils exagèrent un peu.
Donc vous avez fait beaucoup de victimes.
Oh oui.
Racontez-moi, c'est intéressant.
Vous racontez quoi?
C'est un peu comme ouvrir la boîte de Pandore.
Je veux pas finir sur la chaise électrique.
Vous ne voulez pas donner les noms de ces gens?
Non, 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 non. Non,
Combien?
j'en sais rien, peut-être 20. Merci. Vous êtes ma meilleure amie ou ma meilleure ennemie? J'ai pas encore décidé, je vous dirai plus tard.
Vous pouvez y réfléchir et me tenir au courant?
Bonne journée à tous.
Vous voulez dire autre chose à Michelle tant qu'on est là? Un dernier mot? Donc vous avez fait beaucoup de victimes.
Oh oui.
Racontez-moi, c'est intéressant.
Vous racontez quoi?
C'est quand même dingue d'avouer avoir tué 20 personnes et d'en rigoler. C'est répugnant. Non seulement il a gâché sa propre vie, mais aussi celle de tous ces gens. Je pense que ce serait une bonne chose qu'il livre les noms des 20 personnes qu'il est soupçonné d'avoir tuées, en plus de ma mère et de Cindy. Parce que les membres de leur famille méritent de savoir. Quand j'étais petite, je voulais être comme mon père. Ce n'est plus du tout le cas aujourd'hui. Je vis ma vie sans laisser le traumatisme des meurtres me freiner davantage. J'élève mon fils, je travaille et je m'occupe de la maison. Je suis devenue quelqu'un de meilleur que lui. Il n'a pas réussi. C'est plus sûr pour tout le monde qu'il reste là où il est. Je suis convaincue que mon père est capable d'être aussi violent qu'avant. Personne d'autre ne mérite de mourir entre ses mains. J'ai demandé à mon
It was the kind of disappearance that gnawed at the community, like a wound that never fully healed. Clare Maro, a name that had once been so full of life, now lingered in the air like the chill of an unsolved mystery. The day she vanished was no different than any other. The sun rose, people went about their business, and yet for one small town, everything changed. Claire had been a vibrant young woman, the kind of person who lit up a room with her smile. She wasn't the type to attract trouble, not in any obvious way. She wasn't involved in dangerous crowds, didn't carry secrets that could hurt her. She lived quietly, working as a nurse in the local hospital, a job she loved, a routine that made her life feel safe, grounded. That is, until one fateful evening in 1998, when she didn't come home. Her parents, devastated by her sudden absence, had called the police almost immediately. But when the officers arrived at her apartment, they found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no forced entry. It was as if Claire had simply walked out, leaving behind everything she knew. Her wallet was still there, untouched. Her car was parked outside, like she had never left. The only thing missing was Claire herself. The town was in shock. They searched the surrounding areas. They scoured the forests, the riverbanks, even the abandoned factories. Dozens of volunteers combed through every inch of the town, hoping to find something that would lead them to her. It was the kind of case that kept everyone up at night, one that made every creak of the floorboards sound like footsteps, every knock on the door a potential lead. Yet as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the case grew colder. It was like trying to catch smoke in your hands. Nothing tangible, nothing concrete, just whispers of a person who seemed to have vanished into thin air. Years passed, and the memory of Clare Maro began to fade into the background. Her family held on, but their hope was beginning to wither. The police, though they never gave up completely, shifted their focus to other cases, more pressing, more immediate. The cold case file sat in a drawer, collecting dust. As the years stacked up like unread books on a shelf, for everyone except Claire's family, the story was over. But then, 25 years later, something happened that no one had anticipated. The phone rang. Detective Isabel Lambert, who had been one of the original investigators on Claire's case, sat at her desk late one evening, exhausted from another day of working on an unrelated case. The office was quiet, save for the dull hum of the fluorescent lights above. It had been a long time since she had thought about Clare Maro. The case, though always lingering in the back of her mind, had become just another part of the past. Yet when the phone rang, it didn't just break the silence. It broke something deeper. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the words it spoke were anything but ordinary. "There's something you need to see," the voice said, a clue that was missed all those years ago. For a moment, Isabel thought she had misheard. A clue? How could there be a clue now, after all this time? But there was no time to question it. She grabbed her coat, her mind racing with possibilities, wondering if this was a wild goose chase or the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The caller didn't give much away, just a location. A small storage unit near the edge of town, a place Isabel hadn't visited in years. It had once belonged to Claire's family, a place where they had stored some of Claire's belongings after her disappearance. The unit had been opened and closed multiple times over the years, but no one had ever thought to look inside again. Until now. When Isabel arrived, she found the door to the unit slightly ajar. The interior was dim, the air thick with the smell of old cardboard and dust. The space was cluttered with boxes, many of them unopened. But one item caught her eye. A leather-bound diary, resting on top of a pile of old books. It seemed almost out of place, too carefully placed, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. Isabel reached for it cautiously, as though it might disappear if she touched it wrong. The cover was worn, the edges frayed from years of neglect. She opened it, scanning the pages quickly. At first, it seemed like the ordinary ramblings of a young woman. The entries spoke of daily routines, simple things, her thoughts about her job, the weather, her friends. But then, there it was, a sudden shift. The entries began to take on a different tone. The words were laced with anxiety, a sense of foreboding that grew with each passing page. "I feel like I'm being watched," one entry read. "I can't explain it, but something is wrong. It's like the walls are closing in around me." Isabel's heart began to race. Claire had known something was wrong. She had sensed it before her disappearance. The realization hit Isabel like a punch to the gut. Claire hadn't just vanished. She had been running from something. Or someone. The next few pages revealed more unsettling details. Claire had been afraid. Yes, but not of something invisible. There was a name. Someone from her past. Someone close. A person who had been in her life long before that fateful evening. But the name was never fully written. It was scratched out, as if Claire had been too afraid to write it down. The diary ended abruptly, the final pages torn out, leaving only the blank spaces behind. The diary was the first piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't enough to solve the case. Isabel knew that. It wasn't even close. It was just the beginning, just the spark that had reignited the investigation. pulling it from the shadows where it had been left to die. And yet, as Isabel sat there, the diary in her hands, a nagging thought tugged at her mind. The discovery was significant, but it raised even more questions. Why had Claire written these things? Who had she been afraid of? What had happened that night, 25 years ago, that had led her to disappear without a trace? It was too soon to say, too soon to draw conclusions. But one thing was certain, this was no longer a cold case. This was the start of something new, something that could finally bring the truth to light. And Isabel was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. As she left the storage unit and stepped back into the night, the sound of the wind seemed to carry with it the echoes of a long-forgotten mystery. Clare Maro's story was far from over, and the truth, buried for so many years, was about to be uncovered. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched from the shadows, the kind that left a chill crawling up your spine even when the temperature was warm. Isabel walked briskly down the narrow street, the leather-bound diary tucked under her arm. Her thoughts raced, replaying the discovery over and over again in her mind. Who had been the last person to see Claire? And why had Claire been so afraid? The answers were within reach, but they still felt impossibly far away, like reaching for something just beyond the edge of your fingertips. By the time she got back to the precinct, the quiet hum of the office felt almost suffocating. The detectives were already working on other cases, their conversations lost in the background noise of ringing phones and tapping keyboards. But Isabel couldn't focus on anything else. Not tonight. She sat at her desk, the diary open in front of her, the faint glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the pages. The ink stains on the diary were uneven, smudged, as if Claire had been writing in a hurry, trying to get the words out before it was too late. Isabel's finger traced the words written in a shaky hand, reading over and over again the entry that haunted her. I feel like someone is always watching me. I can hear footsteps behind me even when I'm alone. I don't know who it is, but I'm scared. Fear. It was the same emotion Claire had felt before she disappeared. But who had caused it? Who had been lurking in the shadows of her life? The more Isabel read, the more questions came to the surface. The most chilling part was the absence of a name. Claire's entries mentioned the feeling of being watched, but never once did she identify the person. It was as if the identity of the stalker was something so terrifying, so dangerous, that writing it down would make it real. But Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that Claire knew exactly who it was. Then, in one of the last entries, a name appeared. It was barely legible, scribbled out in a desperate attempt to hide it, but there it was. A name Isabel had heard before. Marc Dubois. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. Marc Dubois. He had been a local mechanic, someone who had lived in the town for years. Everyone knew him, or thought they did. He had always been friendly, always had a smile on his face, always quick with a joke. But there had been rumors, whispers that he wasn't as innocent as he appeared, rumors that he had a dark side, one that no one wanted to acknowledge. But Isabel had never thought much of them, until now. The discovery was like a key turning in her mind. Marc Dubois. The name didn't just appear in Claire's diary by chance. It was the link that had been missing for so long. It was the clue that could unravel everything. Isabel immediately called for a background check on Marc Dubois. His name popped up in multiple places, nothing incriminating, but enough to spark Isabel's suspicion. There were small things, a past arrest for disturbing the peace, a history of arguments with neighbors, but nothing that would suggest he was capable of murder. Still, the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that sent a shiver down Isabel's spine. She couldn't waste time. The lead was fresh, but she had to be careful. The small town they lived in wasn't just close-knit. It was tight-lipped, protective of its own. Any sign of suspicion, any hint that the investigation was moving too fast, and Mark might slip through their fingers again, Just like Claire had all those years ago, Isabelle called in her partner, Detective Julien Renard, to help track down Marc Dubois. He was skeptical at first, but when Isabelle explained the connection, he saw the same possibilities she did. They couldn't afford to waste time. By the time they arrived at Marc's house, it was late, and the lights were dim, casting long shadows on the porch. The house was quiet, too quiet. The front door creaked when Isabelle knocked, her hand steady, but her heart pounding in her chest. No one answered. Isabelle exchanged a glance with Julien. He reached for the door handle, but before he could turn it, they heard a sound from inside. It wasn't footsteps. No, it was the faint scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The hairs on the back of Isabelle's neck stood on end. "I don't like this," Julien muttered, but Isabelle was already moving, her instincts taking over. She pushed the door open, the faintest squeal of hinges breaking the silence. The house smelled musty, old, like it had been abandoned for far longer than it had. Isabelle stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, newspapers piled high, and a thick layer of dust on everything. But what caught her eye was the small table near the door, where a stack of letters lay, unopened, untouched. She walked toward this table, her fingers brushing the papers. One letter caught her attention. It was addressed to Marc Dubois, but the return address was unfamiliar. She opened it carefully, the yellowing paper crackling as it unfolded. The letter was brief but chilling. "I know what you did, and I'm coming for you." Isabelle's pulse quickened. The letter, whoever had sent it, only confirmed what she feared. Marc wasn't just a man who had been in Claire's life. He was someone who had kept secrets for years. Secrets that could very well explain Claire's disappearance, and the fear that had haunted her in the days leading up to it. Isabelle knew they had to find him, and fast. This was no longer just a cold case. This was a murder investigation. The chase was on, and Marc Dubois was no longer just a suspect. He was a killer, at least in Isabelle's mind. But where was he now? The search for answers continued. The darkness of the town began to feel deeper, colder, the longer they searched. Every corner held a secret. Every turn led them closer to a truth that had been buried for far too long. The feeling of being watched, of being trapped in a never-ending maze, was stronger than ever. The mystery was unfolding, but the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. The next few days were a blur of activity. Isabelle and Julien couldn't afford to waste any time. The letter, though it offered no direct answers, had given them a clear direction. Marc Dubois was at the center of it all, and they had to find him before he vanished again, before the case turned cold once more. The town's peaceful facade had cracked open, and beneath it, there were too many secrets. Marc had been a quiet presence in their lives for years, his unassuming demeanor fooling everyone. But Isabelle knew better now. There was something dark hiding beneath the surface, something he had buried, and she was determined to uncover it. The search began with Marc's last known whereabouts. They checked his home again, hoping for a clue, something they had missed the first time. The house, still eerily silent, felt like a tomb. Everything seemed out of place, as though Marc had left in a hurry. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had simply walked away, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Isabelle's eyes scanned the room, landing on an old wooden cabinet tucked in the corner of the living room. She hadn't noticed it before, hidden in the shadows. Slowly she approached, her fingers trailing across the surface of the cabinet. A faint smell of mildew lingered in the air, and dust had accumulated on its edges. But as she pulled open the doors, something caught her eye. Inside, stacked neatly, were old photographs, newspapers, and files, some familiar, others completely foreign. Isabelle's heart skipped a beat as she rifled through the papers, each one seeming to lead her deeper into Marc's secret life. The photos were of Claire, Some of them were taken years ago. Photos of her at work, others of her in the town square, laughing with friends. And there, at the bottom of the stack, was a photograph of Claire from the night she disappeared. It was a grainy image, but it was unmistakably her, walking down the street, alone. But that wasn't what sent a chill down Isabel's spine. It was the other photo, the one she hadn't expected to see. Marc Dubois was in it, standing in the shadows, watching Claire as she walked by. It was a perfect shot, a clear, deliberate moment caught on camera. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. He had been following her, watching her, and no one had known. This was more than just a case of a missing woman. This was the result of something far more sinister, a carefully executed plan. Isabel turned the page, her fingers trembling slightly. There were more photos, each one more unsettling than the last. Marc had been documenting Claire's every move for months. And the more Isabel uncovered, the clearer it became. Marc had been preparing for something. But what? Before she could analyze the photos any further, Julian appeared at the door, his face grim. He had good news and bad news. "We've got a lead," he said. "Someone saw Marc 2 days ago, just outside the edge of town. A trucker passing through. He swore he saw him hitchhiking. The trucker didn't stop, but he remembered Marc's face. He said he looked like he was running from something." Isabel didn't hesitate. The lead was thin, but it was all they had. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. She and Julian headed out immediately, the weight of the investigation bearing down on them. As they drove through the dark streets, Isabel's mind raced. If Marc was on the run, it meant he knew they were getting closer to the truth. It meant he was scared. But what was he running from? What had Claire discovered before her disappearance? The drive to the truck stop was long, the night air thick with silence, broken only by the hum of the engine. Isabel kept replaying the images in her mind, the photos of Marc in the shadows, the feeling of being watched that Claire had written about in her diary. It was all coming together, but the puzzle still didn't make sense. They had Marc's name. They had his motives, but there was one thing they didn't have. The truth behind why Claire had been targeted in the first place. When they reached the truck stop, the place was nearly deserted. A few trucks lined the rows, but there were no signs of life. Isabel stepped out of the car, her eyes scanning the area, looking for any sign of Marc. Her instincts told her he wasn't far. He never was. He had always been right there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to disappear again. Julian walked toward the small diner at the edge of the lot. As Isabel followed him, she noticed an old man sitting on a bench nearby. His eyes were bloodshot, and his clothes were weathered, but there was a sharpness in his gaze that made Isabel pause. She approached him, her voice calm but firm. "Did you see a man here a few days ago? A tall guy, probably around his late 30s, maybe early 40s. He might have been hitchhiking." The old man squinted at her, taking a long drag from his cigarette before speaking. "Yeah, I saw him. Right here last week. He was looking for a ride, but I didn't give him one. He gave me the creeps. Kinda nervous, you know? Like he was being hunted." Isabel felt her pulse quicken. "Did he say anything?" The man shook his head. "Nope. Just asked for a ride, then walked off. I figured he'd find someone else. Didn't think much of it at the time, but now that you mention it, yeah, he seemed off. He wasn't just hitchhiking. He was running." Isabel exchanged a look with Julian. This was it. The pieces were falling into place. Marc had been running. He knew something was coming for him, but what? They turned back to the diner, but as they approached, the door swung open. A figure emerged, tall, lanky, with a weathered face that was vaguely familiar. Marc Dubois. His eyes locked onto Isabel's for a split second before he darted for the parking lot. "Get him!" Isabel shouted, but it was too late. Marc was already in motion, sprinting toward a nearby car, keys clutched tightly in his hand. The chase had begun. Isabel and Julian raced after him, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. But Mark was fast, his long legs eating up the distance between them. He reached the car just as Isabel caught up. She lunged for him, grabbing his arm, but he twisted violently, throwing her to the ground. "Stop!" she yelled, but Mark didn't hesitate. He slid into the car and slammed the door, the engine roaring to life. He was getting away. And Isabel knew that if he escaped this time, the case might slip back into the darkness, just like Claire. But there was no turning back now. The screech of tires against asphalt cut through the night air, and Isabel's heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to her feet. Mark had managed to slip into the car and was already speeding away, his headlights slicing through the darkness like a predator on the hunt. The roar of the engine faded into the distance, but Isabel and Julien weren't about to let him vanish again. "Get in the car!" Isabel shouted as she shoved open the passenger door. Julien didn't hesitate, diving into the driver's seat and slamming the gear shift into drive. The tires spun on the gravel for a moment before the car shot forward, following the taillights of Mark's vehicle. The chase was on, and the adrenaline surged through Isabel's veins, dulling everything else. The cold air rushing through the open window, the sting in her knees from the fall. Nothing mattered except catching Mark. He was their only lead now, and every second that ticked away brought them closer to a truth that had been buried for 25 years. Mark's car swerved down the road, weaving between the few trucks that remained at the truck stop. He was pushing it, no longer taking the time to make cautious moves. He was desperate. Isabel could feel it. He had to know they were closing in, that the walls were closing in around him, and he was willing to do anything to escape. The headlights of their car illuminated the dark highway, but Mark's car was already gaining speed, and the distance between them began to grow. Isabel clenched her jaw, gripping the edge of the seat as Julien floored the accelerator. The engine roared in protest, but they gained on him. Just a little bit more with every turn, every twist of the road. "Isabel!" Julien balked, his voice sharp with urgency. "He's heading toward the woods." The dense forest up ahead was a maze of shadows and narrow dirt paths, an area that Mark knew well. It was the perfect place to lose someone. Isabel could feel the familiar tension gnawing at her. They were so close, and yet, if they didn't act fast, Mark would disappear into the trees like he had all those years ago, and they would be left with nothing but the haunting memories of a case that might never be solved. "Don't let him out of your sight!" Isabel shouted. Julien nodded, but it wasn't just the woods they had to worry about now. The faint glow of the car's taillights became a blur as Mark took a sharp turn, veering off the main road and onto a bumpy dirt path that led deeper into the forest. Isabel gritted her teeth as the car jolted over the uneven terrain, the tires kicking up dust and rocks, making it harder to keep up. "Damn it, he's too fast," Julien muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The path was narrow and winding, and Mark's car had the advantage. He was pulling away again, the distance between them growing with every passing second, but Isabel refused to give up. She leaned forward, pressing her hand against the dashboard as if it would somehow help her see more clearly. It was then that she spotted it. Through the trees, there was a clearing up ahead, a small barn-like structure partially hidden in the darkness. Mark's car was headed straight for it. "Take the next left," Isabel barked. Julien reacted instantly, swerving the car onto a smaller, almost hidden road that seemed to stretch off the main path. The car bumped and jolted, but Julien kept control, steering them through the forest at a breakneck speed. Mark's car was no longer in sight. The forest was dense, the trees closing in around them as the road became narrower. Isabel's pulse raced in her ears. The hunt was on, and she knew they were almost there. Almost where Mark had planned his escape. He had to have a hideout nearby. This wasn't just a random flight from the scene. Mark had been waiting for this moment. He had prepared for it. He had been planning for years. They skidded into the clearing just as Mark's car pulled up in front of the barn-like structure. The headlights illuminated the area, and for the briefest moment, Isabel saw Mark's face, tense and pale, looking over his shoulder as he slammed the car into park. He jumped out of the vehicle, heading straight for the barn. This was it. Isabel's instincts kicked in. They were running out of time. "Stay close," she ordered Julian as they quickly exited the car, their shoes crunching on the gravel. They moved fast, shadows slipping through the trees, their footsteps barely making a sound. The barn loomed ahead, the door slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the gap like a knife. They approached silently, Isabel motioning for Julian to cover the left side while she moved toward the right. She could hear Mark's voice now, muffled but unmistakable, speaking in low tones. Isabel paused for a moment, her heart racing. This was the moment that everything would change. The truth, the final piece of the puzzle, was just inside. Taking a deep breath, she signaled Julian, and they moved in. As they reached the barn, the door creaked open slightly more, and Isabel slipped inside, gun raised. Julian followed closely behind, his movements fluid but tense. The barn was dimly lit, the air thick with dust and the smell of hay. But there was something else in the air, a sense of urgency, of a plan unraveling. The silence in the barn was suffocating. The only sounds were the low murmur of Mark's voice and the distant rustling of the wind outside. "Mark!" Isabel called out, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. There was a moment of stillness before Mark's voice stopped. Then, a slight shuffle and the sound of a drawer opening. He was trying to make a last-ditch effort to escape. He had no intention of surrendering. Isabel's eyes darted to the corner of the barn, where a faint shadow moved. Without thinking, she darted to the left, toward the small window. But as she moved, she heard the sharp crack of a gunshot. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Isabel's heart skipped a beat, but the bullet missed, embedding itself in the wooden beam above her head. "Get down!" Julian shouted, pushing Isabel to the ground. The world seemed to slow, and in that instant, everything Isabel had worked for, everything she had fought for, could come crashing down. But she wasn't going to let Mark escape again. She wasn't going to let him get away with Claire's murder. With a swift motion, Isabel pulled out her gun, steadying her aim as Mark tried to run. There was no escape. The walls were closing in. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice a mixture of authority and desperation. Mark hesitated, his eyes wild, panic written all over his face. He had nowhere to go, and now the truth would finally be revealed. Mark's eyes flicked between Isabel and the door, his breath ragged, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The gunshot had silenced the air around him, and the barn seemed to hold its breath as the three of them stood in a standoff. Mark standing in the center of the room, his back against the wall, Isabel and Julian, guns aimed and steady. "Don't make this harder than it already is," Isabel said, her voice low but firm, the weight of years of investigation hanging in every word. She wasn't going to let him escape again, not after all the pain, the suffering, the 25 years of unanswered questions. Mark's eyes darted to the ground, his fists clenched at his sides as if wrestling with something inside him. The fear that had been in his eyes when they had first closed in on him now seemed to merge with something else, something darker. There was no more innocence in his expression, just the cold certainty of someone who had seen their world come crashing down. "You don't understand." Mark's voice cracked, the words escaping before he could stop them. "You don't know what she made me do." Isabel took a step forward, her grip tightening on the gun. She wasn't intimidated. "What did she make you do, Mark? What was it that you couldn't face?" Mark's head snapped up, and for the first time, he met Isabel's gaze with something that was almost defiant. "She was going to ruin everything," he whispered, almost to himself, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. She couldn't leave me, not after everything we did." Isabel took a step closer, her mind racing with the implications of what he was saying. She had always known there was more to the story. But this was something she hadn't expected. What was Mark talking about? What had he been involved in with Claire? Why did he think she was going to ruin him? Mark, listen to me, Isabel said, trying to steady her voice, to keep him from spiraling further. Tell me what happened that night. The night Claire disappeared. You can end this now. You can stop running. Mark let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing in the empty barn. Ended? You think I've been running from this? You think I wanted this? He stepped back, his eyes wild. She made me hurt her. The words hit Isabel like a punch to the gut. She could feel her heart rate quicken, the realization setting in, the sickening weight of the truth. She had known there was more, but to hear it from Mark's mouth was something else entirely. Claire hadn't just disappeared. She had been a victim of something far darker. Mark's words stumbled over each other, as if he were trying to explain himself, but the guilt in his voice was unmistakable. I didn't mean to go that far. I thought if I could just keep her close, she'd never leave me. She was mine. She had to be. Isabel's mind raced. There were so many questions now. What had Claire discovered about Mark? What had driven him to this breaking point? The evidence had been clear. He had been following her, watching her. But now, with Mark's confession, it was clear that there was more to this story than a simple disappearance. I never wanted to kill her, Mark continued, his voice cracking. I just didn't want to lose her. When she started pulling away, when she started asking questions, I couldn't let her go. I thought if I could just keep her here, keep her quiet, everything would be okay. He laughed bitterly. But it wasn't. It never was. The tension in the barn thickened, the weight of Mark's confession settling between them. Isabel's stomach churned as she pieced the narrative together in her mind. Mark had been obsessively controlling, following Claire, trying to trap her. She had been scared, terrified, writing about her fear in her diary. She had known something was wrong, but she had never been able to escape it. And in the end, Mark had done what he thought was necessary to keep her. He had taken her life. For a moment, the barn was silent. The only sound the distant rustling of wind through the trees. Julien stayed silent, his gun still trained on Mark, his expression unreadable. Isabel could see the shift in Mark, how he had been teetering on the edge, now revealing the full extent of his madness. I didn't kill her immediately, Mark whispered, as though the words were dragging themselves from deep inside him. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stay with me. She was gonna leave. She kept saying she wanted out. I couldn't let her go. Not like that. The weight of the moment settled over Isabel. She could see Mark's hands trembling, the weight of his guilt bearing down on him. But she also knew that his remorse, his confession, didn't change what had happened. It didn't change what he had done to Claire. Where is she, Mark? Isabel asked, her voice steady, even as the horror of the situation crept up her spine. Where did you hide her? Mark's eyes flickered, a flash of panic crossing his face before he quickly masked it with something darker, more resigned. He knew what was coming. He knew that he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. I buried her, he muttered, his voice cracking. She was too beautiful to just leave behind. She deserved to be somewhere peaceful, somewhere where no one would ever find her. Isabel stepped forward, her gun still aimed, but her mind was working furiously. Where, Mark? She pressed again, her voice unwavering. Where did you bury her? Mark swallowed, his lips dry. For a moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and locked eyes with Isabel. It's in the old vineyard, he whispered, at the edge of town, near the creek. She's there. It's the only place she could be, away from everything, away from them. I thought I was saving her, keeping her safe. Isabel's heart raced as she processed the information. The vineyard. It wasn't far from here, just a few miles down the road. The air seemed to thicken as she realized the enormity of what Mark was saying. This was it. This was the final piece. The place where Claire had been hidden for all these years, buried in the earth, left to become another cold case. But now the truth was coming to light. Mark's confession, his broken admission, had led them to the end of the road. "Get on your knees," Isabel ordered, her voice cold now, the weight of the case crashing down on her. "You're under arrest for the murder of Clare Maro." Mark didn't resist. He didn't fight. He knew it was over. His face, drained of all emotion, looked like that of a man who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long. Isabel wasn't sure if there was any part of him left that felt remorse. But at that moment, it didn't matter. As Julian moved forward to cuff Mark, Isabel took a final, lingering look around the barn. It was over. Clare Maro's case was no longer cold. The truth had been unearthed, and justice, however bitter, was about to be served. But even as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Isabel knew that this was far from the end. The damage had been done. The scars would never heal, not for Claire's family, and not for the town that had been haunted by her disappearance for so long. And the questions, though answered, would continue to echo through the quiet nights of the town. Where did the darkness begin, and how had it taken root? The hours that followed Mark's arrest were a blur of activity. Isabel and Julianne made the necessary arrangements for Mark's transport back to the station. The charge of murder was clear, but the finality of it didn't hit Isabel right away. Her mind kept playing the same moment over and over again. The confession, the brokenness in Mark's eyes as he admitted what he had done. The details of Claire's final moments as told by her killer. It all felt surreal, like the case had somehow turned from a mystery into a nightmare that wasn't quite finished yet. By the time they arrived back at the precinct, the dawn had broken. The first light of morning crept through the blinds, casting long shadows over the office. Isabel felt the weight of the night pressing down on her as she walked past the rows of desks, past the empty chairs where detectives would normally be sitting, heads down in concentration. This wasn't a victory, not yet. Not when the full scope of what Mark had done was still unfurling before them. Mark was locked up in an interrogation room, his face devoid of emotion. But Isabel could see the faint tremor in his hands as he sat, waiting for the inevitable. His confession had already sealed his fate. But there was still the matter of the body, of Claire's final resting place, of her family, of the years that had been lost to this terrifying silence. No, this wasn't a victory, not yet. Isabel sat down at her desk and opened the folder containing the case files, the thick stack of papers that had once been so frustrating, so full of dead ends. Now, with Mark's arrest, they were more than just files. They were the final pieces of a puzzle that, for 25 years, had remained out of reach. Yet something still gnawed at her. She had his confession. She had Mark's broken words. But there was still a question hanging in the air, one that had yet to be answered. Why? Why Claire? Isabel's fingers drummed lightly on the surface of her desk as she looked over the files. Clare Maro had been a nurse. She'd been well liked in the community. She hadn't been involved in anything dangerous, not in any way that would make her a target. From what they knew, Claire's life had been quiet, predictable. So why had Mark turned on her? Why had he gone to such extreme lengths to keep her, if he had even cared about her at all? Julian entered the office, his expression grim. He didn't need to say anything. Isabel could see it in his eyes. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. It was time to take the next step. "We have to go to the vineyard," Julian said, his voice steady but tinged with the same urgency that had taken over Isabel. "Mark's told us where Claire's body is. He's been clear about it. We need to recover her." Isabel nodded, standing up from her desk. There was no time to waste. Every minute that passed made the truth harder to face. The town needed closure. Claire's family needed closure. And most of all, Claire deserved closure. Her body had been left to rot in the earth for too long. Her death had never been acknowledged, never mourned. It was time to change that. They drove out of the city in silence, the quiet hum of the car a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. The road that led to the old vineyard was narrow, winding, and surrounded by dense trees. The silence of the morning hung in the air, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like the calm before a storm. The anticipation of what lay ahead was almost suffocating. As they pulled into the vineyard's entrance, Isabel could feel the weight of the place. It wasn't just the physical location. It was the significance. This had been Mark's hiding place. This had been where he thought he could bury everything and leave it behind. But today, everything would be uncovered. The vineyard was sprawling, overgrown with vines that hadn't been tended to in years. It was a place that had once been alive with activity, but had since fallen into decay. The scent of earth and damp soil filled the air as they made their way to the clearing Mark had described. The barn loomed ahead, just as Mark had mentioned, standing silent and solitary in the middle of the field. The door was slightly ajar, and Isabel could see the faint outline of a structure hidden inside. Her chest tightened as they approached. "This is it," Julianne murmured as they stepped out of the car. "Let's finish this." The barn door creaked as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rot and dust. There was a pile of old wooden crates in the corner, their surfaces coated with layers of grime. But it wasn't the crates that caught Isabel's attention. It was the ground. The earth had been disturbed, the soil turned over unevenly, as if someone had hastily covered something up. There, at the center of the barn, the earth was fresh, newly disturbed, still moist to the touch. Isabel's hands trembled as she knelt, her fingers brushing the soft soil. She motioned for Julian to help, and together they grabbed the nearest tools, shovels, picks, anything that could break through the earth. Time was running out, and they couldn't afford to wait any longer. As the soil was cleared away, the unmistakable shape of a body began to emerge, wrapped in plastic, the outline of Claire's form now visible. Isabel's stomach churned as the realization hit her. The years of searching, the hours of empty hope, had come to this. Clare Maro, missing for so long, was finally here, in front of her, hidden away like some dark secret. They continued to dig, working quickly but carefully. As the body came into full view, Isabel's heart clenched. The body was cold to the touch, but there was something more, something that pierced her deeply. The finality of it, the sheer horror of it all. Mark hadn't just killed Claire. He had buried her here, in this quiet, forgotten place, and let her become part of the earth. He had made her disappear, taken her from everyone who loved her, and left the world without her. It was over. Isabel could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. Clare Maro's case was no longer a cold case. But the grief was overwhelming. The pain of the loss, the years of silence. They could never be taken back. Isabel stood up, the tears threatening to break through. But she didn't allow them to fall. Not yet. There was still work to be done. There were still questions to answer. And the final step was yet to come. "We need to get her home," Isabel said softly, her voice breaking slightly. The team worked in silence as they carefully lifted Claire's body from the earth. It was a somber moment, one filled with the weight of a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Isabel felt a deep sense of relief. Yes, this was what they had come for. But it wasn't the end. Not really. They drove back to town with Claire's body in the back of the car, and for the first time in 25 years, the silence was not just one of absence. It was a silence of finality. The town would no longer have to carry the burden of unanswered questions. Claire would no longer be just a name, a ghost haunting their memories. She would finally be laid to rest. As they arrived back at the precinct, the weight of the truth settled in. The case was over, but it wasn't over. The closure was real, but the scars it left would never truly heal. For Claire's family, for the town, and for Isabel herself, This would be something that they would carry for the rest of their lives. The past had come crashing back, but the present was finally there too. Clare Maro's case was closed, and Marc Dubois would pay for what he had done. The days following the discovery of Claire's body felt surreal. Isabelle could still feel the weight of the earth on her hands, the coldness of Claire's remains as they were carefully lifted from the soil. It had been a long road, filled with pain, confusion, and unanswered questions. But now, at last, there was a sense of closure, however bitter. As the team processed the evidence, Marc Dubois sat in his cell, his demeanor unchanged. His confession had been full of emotion, broken and remorseful, yet somehow detached. He had confessed everything, but it hadn't been an outpouring of guilt. It had been more like the release of a burden. A man finally unshackled from the weight of his lies, but not truly understanding the enormity of his actions. Isabelle couldn't stop thinking about him, about how quickly Marc had turned from the quiet mechanic in their small town into a monster in the eyes of Claire's family, and of the community that had trusted him for years. The emotions that had driven him to do what he had were still a mystery. Why Claire? Why the obsession? He had never offered a clear explanation, beyond his desire to keep her for himself. But it wasn't just Marc that Isabelle was trying to make sense of. It was the years, the long, painful years when Claire had been missing, when her family had been left to wonder whether she was dead or alive. The unanswered questions that still lingered in the air, like smoke in the room. The town had moved on in those years, but Claire's family had never stopped searching, never stopped hoping that she would be found. And now, even in death, she had finally been brought home. But it didn't undo the pain. Isabelle stood at the precinct window, looking out at the gray sky. The city was waking up, life continuing its daily rhythm. But she couldn't shake the haunting images of the past few days. The barn, the soil, the photos. Marc's face as he confessed. The tears of Claire's mother as she was told that her daughter's body had been found. The moment of closure that hadn't felt like closure at all. I keep thinking about the things she must have gone through. Julien's voice interrupted Isabelle's thoughts. He had entered the office silently, now standing beside her, his gaze also fixed on the horizon. Yeah, Isabelle replied, her voice soft. She must have known something was wrong long before she disappeared. She felt it, but she couldn't stop it. Julien nodded. It's haunting, really, to think that she was afraid, that she tried to leave, and that he'd been watching her all along. Isabelle turned to face him, the weight of their shared thoughts pressing down on her. She wasn't just his victim, Julien. She was a prisoner in her own life, a prisoner of his obsession. He had control over her, even when she thought she was free. The silence that followed was thick, each of them carrying the weight of the investigation, the burden of uncovering the truth. It wasn't just the case that weighed on Isabelle now. It was the sense of helplessness, the understanding that there had been so many moments where Claire had been in danger, yet no one had seen it. No one had noticed. No one had believed her fear. Isabelle felt the sting of guilt deep in her chest. It was the same guilt that had followed her through so many cases, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she could have done more. That if they had found Claire sooner, if they had connected the dots earlier, maybe things would have turned out differently. But she couldn't linger on those thoughts. Not now. Not when there was still so much work to do. Marc's arrest had been the first step, but the case wasn't fully closed until everything was tied together. Claire's family deserved justice, and that meant making sure the entire truth was laid bare. Isabelle walked back to her desk, where the case file was waiting, its weight now heavier than ever. There was still the matter of Marc's trial, the prosecution's work, the steps that would ultimately bring the case to a legal resolution. But the emotional toll, the impact it had on the community, those things couldn't be resolved in a courtroom. Later that afternoon, Isabelle and Julien stood in the courtroom, watching as Marc was brought in, shackled, his expression a mixture of apathy and resignation. The trial was brief, almost anticlimactic. Mark pleaded guilty to the murder of Clare Maro, his lawyer offering no defense beyond a plea for leniency, citing his mental state. But there was no sympathy in the courtroom. Not from the jury, not from Clare's family, not from Isabel. Mark's final sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all they could give Clare now. All they could do to ensure that no one else would fall victim to his cruelty. The courtroom emptied, the buzz of voices fading as Isabel stood silently at the back. The weight of it all was heavy, but there was something else, too. A quiet sense of justice, even if it felt incomplete. Even if it didn't bring Clare back. Isabel stepped out of the courtroom, the air outside cool against her skin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the street, the city settling into its nightly rhythm. She stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The normality of life, the peacefulness of it, even as the world around her was forever altered by what had happened. It was over, but it wasn't over. She felt a soft hand on her shoulder, and when she turned, she saw Clare's mother standing behind her. There were tears in the woman's eyes, but there was also a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. She had always been the one left behind, always searching, always hoping. But now, she finally had the one thing she had longed for, the truth. "Thank you," the woman said softly, her voice breaking. "Thank you for finding her." Isabel swallowed hard, the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. But she held them back. "I'm just sorry it took so long," she said, her voice thick. Clare's mother shook her head. "No, you gave me the truth, and that's enough." Isabel's heart ached for the woman, for the family who had lived with the absence of a daughter for so long. But now, finally, they could start to heal. They could mourn properly, with the knowledge that Clare had been found. As Isabel watched the woman walk away, she felt the weight of everything that had happened begin to lift, ever so slightly. The case was no longer just a cold case. It was a story of loss, of trauma, but also of justice. The night was quiet as Isabel walked down the steps of the courthouse. The world seemed almost too peaceful, too quiet, given everything that had happened. But that was the way of things. Life went on, whether or not the wounds had healed. The cold case was closed, but the echoes of it would last forever. And Isabel would carry those echoes with her, as she always did, in the quiet corners of her mind. It was what she did. It was what all detectives did. Justice was done. But the past was never truly finished, not until the last person who remembered was gone. The weeks following Mark Dubois' trial were oddly quiet. It was as though the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the final exhale of the storm that had come and gone. The air felt lighter, the days stretched out before them like a blank canvas. But beneath that surface calm, there was something deeper, a sense of unfinished business. Justice had been served, but the scars of the past would not easily fade. Isabel felt the weight of the case, heavy on her shoulders as she sat at her desk, the dull hum of the office filling the space. The phone rang occasionally, but for the most part, it was a period of calm. People had moved on. At least they tried to. Life was returning to normal. But for Isabel, things would never be the same. The discovery of Clare's body had shattered the illusion of peace. The case, once a faint echo in the back of the town's mind, had resurfaced with a vengeance, dragging the community through the darkness once more. And even though Mark was behind bars, it was hard to shake the feeling that something had been lost forever. The years of searching, of unanswered questions, the toll on Clare's family, there was no way to undo the damage. There was no way to make it right. She glanced down at the case file once more. The final paperwork had been filed, but the weight of it lingered. The trial had been swift. Mark's plea for leniency rejected without a second thought. The sentence was life in prison without parole. An ending that felt almost too simple after everything that had come before. But Isabel knew that it was never really about the sentence. It was about the truth. the one thing that had eluded everyone for so long. The truth had come, late and bitter, but it had come nonetheless. Still, there was a part of Isabel that couldn't stop wondering about Mark, about his motives, about his twisted obsession with Claire. What had driven him to such extremes? What had caused the slow slide from affection to madness? There were no easy answers, just a broken man and a broken woman whose lives had been intertwined in a tragedy that no one had seen coming. Isabel reached for the file again, her fingers tracing the edges of the worn paper. She felt as though she couldn't let go of it, even now. The case was over, but her mind kept drifting back to Claire. Back to the fear in her eyes. Back to the letters she'd written in her diary. Back to the haunting feeling that Claire had known her fate long before that final night. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Isabel picked it up, not expecting much. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was Claire's mother, Isabel, the voice on the other end said, quiet and fragile. "I need to speak with you. Can you come by? It's important." Isabel's chest tightened, but she didn't hesitate. "Of course, I'll be there in a few minutes." The drive to Claire's family home felt longer than it should have. The familiar streets somehow feeling foreign now. Isabel had visited the family countless times during the investigation, each visit leaving her with a sense of sadness, of sympathy for a family that had never gotten the closure they deserved. But now, after the trial, after the burial, it felt different. The town had moved on, but Claire's mother was still living in the aftermath of the nightmare her daughter had endured. When Isabel arrived, she found Claire's mother sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face drawn and tired. The lines on her face told a story of loss, of years spent wondering what had happened to her daughter, of the pain that never quite faded. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that Isabel couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming," Claire's mother said softly, her voice weak but steady. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Isabel sat beside her, her heart heavy. "Of course. What's going on?" Claire's mother hesitated, her fingers twitching nervously in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about everything that happened, and I realized something I need to tell you." Her voice faltered slightly, as though the weight of the words was suffocating her. Isabel felt a pang of dread in her chest. She had braced herself for many things, but this felt different. "What is it?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I've been going through Claire's things," Claire's mother began, her eyes distant as she looked off into the distance. "The things she left behind. The books, the photos. I found something. A letter." "A letter." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of letter?" "It was addressed to me," Claire's mother replied, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't something she ever gave to me. She must have written it just before she disappeared." Isabel's breath caught in her throat. "What did it say?" Claire's mother took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for something painful. "It was strange, Isabel. She spoke of her fear, of Mark. She said he had been getting more possessive. But what struck me most was the way she described him. She said he was dangerous, that he wouldn't stop until he had her completely." Isabel listened closely, her mind racing. This was new information, new and horrifying. Claire had known Mark's obsession was dangerous. She had known it long before Isabel and the others had even started to put the pieces together. She had known something was wrong, but had no way of stopping it. "I'm so sorry," Isabel said quietly, her voice full of empathy. "You didn't deserve any of this. I had no idea Claire felt that way." Claire's mother nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I wish I had known sooner. I wish I could have helped her. But it's too late now. The damage has been done." She looked at Isabel with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "You found her. You brought her home. And for that, I can never thank you enough." Isabel swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. "I just wish I could have done more." "No, Claire's mother said gently, her voice shaking. You did more than anyone could have. The weight of the conversation hung heavy between them, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The town might have moved on, but Claire's mother would always carry this burden. The pain of losing her daughter would never truly fade. Isabel, there's one more thing, Claire's mother added, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to know. I've forgiven Mark, not for what he did, but for myself. I can't keep living in the anger. It's too much. I have to let go. Isabel was taken aback. Forgiven him? She asked, her voice thick with disbelief. Yes, Claire's mother said firmly. Not because he deserves it, but because I can't live with the hate anymore. It's the only way I can keep going. Isabel didn't know what to say. She had never expected this, never imagined that Claire's mother could find any peace after everything that had happened. But somehow, she understood. She could see how the years of searching, of waiting for answers, had worn down her spirit. And now, after all that pain, Claire's mother was trying to find her way back to something resembling peace. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was something more complex, something born from the depths of grief. Isabel stood up, her heart heavy but her mind clearer. I'm glad you're finding peace, she said quietly. You deserve that. As Isabel left Claire's family home, the weight of the case finally began to lift, bit by bit. The town had moved on, but Isabel would never truly be able to. The echoes of Claire's disappearance, her tragic death, would always be with her. But there was one thing she now knew for certain. The truth had been brought to light. And for Claire's mother, for Claire's family, there would at least be the quiet comfort of knowing that she had not been forgotten. The weight of the case began to settle into Isabel's bones, heavy and suffocating. It was a feeling she knew well, an exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. It was the kind of fatigue that lingered in her mind, that crept into her dreams, that clung to her thoughts in the quiet moments when everything else fell away. Clare Maro's case had consumed her for so long, and now that it was finally over, it felt like a strange sort of relief mixed with grief. She had closed the door on one chapter, but the scars it left would never fully fade. The days following Claire's funeral were quieter. The town had returned to its routine, the buzz of daily life replacing the sense of urgency that had gripped it for so long. But the air felt different now, charged with the residue of all that had happened. There was a shift, a sense of closure that Isabel knew would never fully take root. How could it? After 25 years, after everything that had been lost, there could be no real closure. There would only be the shadow of it. Isabel sat at her desk one morning, the first cup of coffee cooling beside her. She hadn't expected to be so lost in thought. Normally, the bustling activity of the precinct would snap her out of any lingering emotions, but today, her mind was too full. It was only when her phone rang that she snapped back to reality. Isabel Lambert, she answered, her voice steady. The voice on the other end was familiar but unexpected. It was Claire's mother. Isabel, the woman's voice cracked. I wanted to thank you, one more time, for everything, for bringing Claire home, for giving me the truth. Isabel's chest tightened. It had been a few weeks since their conversation, but hearing her voice again felt like reopening an old wound. You don't have to thank me, Isabel said softly. You know I'm just doing my job. No, Claire's mother replied, her tone steady now. It's not just that. It's the way you gave us the truth, even when it was so hard. You didn't give up on her, even when everyone else had. Isabel paused, feeling her throat tighten. The words were so simple, yet they carried a weight that she hadn't expected. I couldn't have done it without the help of the team, and without you, for never giving up. You were the one who kept fighting. You kept searching. There was a silence on the line, a soft pause before Claire's mother spoke again, quieter this time. You know, Isabel, it's strange. I've been carrying this weight for so long, and I thought I would never get rid of it. I thought that the anger and the grief would always be there, eating me alive. But now I don't feel that. I just feel calm. I feel like I can breathe again. Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the unexpected words. It wasn't something she had expected to hear, especially not after all that had happened. The years of torment, the sleepless nights, the searching, the not knowing. It had broken Claire's mother in ways that no one could truly understand. And yet here she was, speaking with a peace that Isabel hadn't anticipated. "I'm glad you feel that way," Isabel said quietly. "I really am. You deserve that peace." After the call ended, Isabel sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. The complexity of what Claire's mother had said kept replaying in her mind. After everything, after all the darkness, the lies, the death, she had found peace. But Isabel wasn't sure if she could say the same for herself. She had done everything she could to bring justice, but the echoes of Claire's death would always remain. How could they not? She would always carry this case with her, even if she wasn't working on it anymore. It had changed her, had marked her in ways she wasn't sure how to reconcile. That evening, as Isabel walked through the quiet streets of the town, the weight of the last few weeks settled over her like a thick fog. She thought about Claire, about the moments in her life that had led to her becoming the woman she was, a woman who fought for survival, who fought for her freedom, even when the walls closed in around her. Claire had fought until the very end, and Isabel admired her for that. But what she had never known, what no one had ever known, was how hard that fight had been. The streets of the town were almost eerily quiet, the lights from the street lamps casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Isabel's footsteps echoed in the stillness, but the air didn't feel as oppressive as it had when the case was fresh. It wasn't the same feeling of urgency, of searching for something just out of reach. It was something else now. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everything has been turned over and nothing is quite the same. She arrived at the old cafe where she and Julien had spent many nights discussing the case, its twists and turns. It felt strange to be there without him. He had been a constant throughout the investigation, but now with the case closed, there was a distance between them that hadn't existed before. She sat down at one of the booths, the same spot they'd occupied so many times in the past, and allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in a long while, she felt the absence of the case settle in. It was done. The truth was out, and Mark would pay for his crime. But there was still something unsettled in her heart, something unresolved. What would happen to the town now that the truth had been uncovered? What would happen to Claire's family now that they had the answers they'd longed for? They had justice, but at what cost? As the evening passed, Isabel found herself lost in her thoughts. Her mind drifted back to Claire, to her final moments, to the terror she must have felt. But there was also something else, something that Isabel couldn't fully understand yet. The peace that Claire's mother had spoken of, the peace that had come after all the years of pain and torment. Could it really be that simple? Could forgiveness, or at least acceptance, bring peace? The night wore on, and Isabel's phone buzzed again. It was a text from Julien. "Want to grab a drink later? We've earned it." Isabel smiled faintly, her fingers tapping out a response. "I'll meet you there." She stood up from this booth, taking one last look at the cafe that had been her refuge for so many long nights. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it would never truly be over. But for now, the case was closed. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to find a little peace, too. The air in the bar was thick with the chatter of voices, the clink of glasses, and the low hum of music playing in the background. It was a familiar scene, one Isabel had found herself in countless times before. But tonight, as she walked in, it felt different. There was a quietness to the way she moved, a stillness in her chest that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the weight of the case that was lingering. though that was certainly part of it. It was the strange feeling that something had shifted inside of her, something that could never fully return to its former place. Julian was already seated at their usual table, a pint of beer in front of him, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. He looked up when Isabel entered, his face lighting up with a welcoming grin. But there was a new heaviness in his gaze as well, a recognition that this wasn't just another case solved. This one had gotten under their skin, and it would take time to shake it off. "Finally," Julian said, raising his glass in a small salute. "Thought you were going to stand me up." Isabel gave him a half smile, her fingers brushing the edge of her glass as she took a seat. She could feel the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her, but there was also a strange sense of peace in the air. Maybe it was the relief of finally knowing the truth about Claire's fate. Or maybe it was the fact that they had finally captured Marc Dubois, the man responsible for tearing apart so many lives. Whatever it was hard to shake the lingering question of what happened next. What happens when the case is solved, when the truth has been brought to light, and there's nothing left to uncover? "You look like you've been thinking," Julian said, taking a sip from his beer. His eyes softened, the usual teasing glint replaced with something more reflective. Isabel let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I have been. I keep wondering, what happens after? After the case is closed, after Mark is behind bars? What happens to the people who are left behind?" Julian leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "I guess that's the thing we don't often talk about. The people who don't get closure. The ones who have to live with the aftermath. Claire's family. They're going to be different now, but they have something they didn't have before. The truth." Isabel nodded slowly, her fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table. "I know, but even with the truth, it doesn't feel like enough. Claire's mother said she's at peace now, but I don't know if that's true. Can peace really come after everything they went through?" Julian's expression softened. "I think it can, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and it takes acceptance. The truth is a big part of it, but so is letting go of the anger, the guilt, all the things that keep them from healing." Isabel was quiet for a moment, reflecting on what he'd said. It wasn't easy to let go of anger, not after everything Claire's family had endured. She couldn't even imagine the weight of that kind of loss, the kind that hung over you for years, the kind that had you searching for answers in places that didn't seem to hold any. The toll that took on a person's spirit was immeasurable. "So what now?" Isabel asked, her voice quiet. Julian set his glass down, his eyes meeting hers. "Now we live. We move on, in whatever way we can. For us, it's back to work. But for Claire's family, it's different. They'll have their own journey. Maybe they'll find some peace, or maybe they won't. But they'll have the chance to heal, and that's something." Isabel took a deep breath, the weight of it all settling in. "It's hard to let go, you know? You spend so much time focusing on the case, on solving the puzzle, that you forget about the people who are left to pick up the pieces, the people who don't get to walk away when it's all over." Julian nodded slowly, his eyes somber. "Yeah, we forget that sometimes. We're so focused on the process, on the pursuit of justice, that we don't always see the aftermath. The emotional toll it takes on everyone involved, the families, the victims, even us." Isabel glanced out the window, watching the world go by. It was strange, she thought, how quickly everything could return to normal, to routine. The cars drove by, the people passed Boa in and out of the bar, oblivious to the battles that had been fought and won and lost right under their noses. For a moment she didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. The world had moved on, but she felt like she was still holding on to the pieces of the case, still trying to make sense of it all. How do you move on when the past won't let you go? How do you find peace when the truth has already torn so much apart? Julian's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're not alone in this, Isabel. We all carry these cases with us, but we don't have to carry them forever. Eventually, The weight will lighten, but it takes time. Isabel nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. Time. The one thing that had kept her going in the face of all the obstacles. The one thing that had allowed her to keep pushing forward. She couldn't undo the damage. She couldn't change the past. But she could move forward. She could allow herself to heal, even if it took time. I don't know if I'll ever be okay with this case, Isabel said, her voice quiet but resolute. But I think I'm starting to understand that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to carry the weight, as long as it doesn't break you. Julian smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. That's what makes you a great detective, Isabel. You don't let the weight break you. The words hung in the air between them, and Isabel couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. It wasn't just about finding the truth. It wasn't just about solving the case. It was about understanding that life went on, even when the past continued to haunt you. It was about accepting that closure wasn't always immediate, that healing took time, and that peace was something you had to find for yourself. Isabel took a deep breath, pushing away the lingering thoughts that weighed on her. She had done everything she could. She had found Claire. She had brought the truth to light. Now, it was time to let go. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding a way to move forward, to live with what had happened, and to keep going. Thanks, Julian, Isabel said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. For everything. Julian raised his glass. Anytime. Isabel lifted her own glass in return, the weight of the case still present, but somehow lighter than it had been. It wasn't over, not really. But for now, they could breathe. They had solved the case. They had found Claire. And though the scars of the past would never fully heal, there was hope that, in time, they would learn to live with them. And that was enough for now. Weeks had passed since the trial. The world outside seemed to move forward, as it always did. The days blended together like brushstrokes in a painting, each one a small part of something much larger, something that could never be fully understood. Isabel had seen cases close, seen investigations come to an end. But this one had been different. It had left a mark on her that she wasn't sure she would ever erase. Marc Dubois had been sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed by his own confession. It was a clear resolution, but the emotions that followed were far from simple. Marc's actions had altered the lives of so many people, and no matter how many years he spent behind bars, that couldn't be undone. Isabel walked the same streets she had always walked, passing the same shops, the same familiar faces. But nothing felt the same. The case had haunted her more than any other, leaving a heavy, lingering presence in her mind. She had done her job. She had solved the case. But there was no easy satisfaction in it. Not when the pain of the victims and their families was still so raw. Clare Maro's family had taken the first steps toward healing, but Isabel knew it wouldn't be easy. The emotional scars of the past 25 years wouldn't disappear overnight. They couldn't. And while Claire's mother had found a form of peace in the aftermath, Isabel wasn't sure if that peace would ever be something she herself could find. She had done everything right, everything she was supposed to do, but there was still a void inside her. Something was missing. As Isabel sat at her desk one morning, going through the routine of clearing out old files, a knock on the door broke the silence. She looked up, startled, not expecting anyone. "Come in," she said, wiping her hands on her pants and straightening up. The door opened slowly, and Julian walked in, his face serious, but his eyes soft with something like understanding. He wasn't just her colleague. He was a friend. And Isabel knew that he, too, was still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "You busy?" Julian asked, his tone casual, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. "No," Isabel said, pushing the case files aside. "What's up?" Julian hesitated for a moment, then leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed over his chest. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about how hard it is to let go of a case like this, how you carry it with you, even when it's over." Isabel glanced up at him, her mind momentarily drifting back to their conversation in the bar. The weight of that conversation, of the unspoken truth they both carried, hung between them now. "I don't think I can ever truly let go," Isabel said quietly, her voice more vulnerable than she'd meant it to be. "There are cases that stick with you, you know? The ones that stay in the back of your mind, gnawing at you. This one, it's different. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop thinking about it." Julien nodded slowly, his expression understanding. "I know. But sometimes you have to let the case go. Not for your own sake, but for theirs." He paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. Claire's family. They can't keep living in the past, holding on to that pain. And we can't either. Isabel stared at him, her heart heavy, but she could feel the truth in his words. She had always known that solving a case wasn't the end of the journey. It was only one part of it. The emotional aftermath, the toll it took on everyone involved. That was the part that never truly went away. "I know," Isabel replied, her voice soft. "I just wish I could do more. Wish I could give them more than just the truth." Julien gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You gave them the most important thing, Isabel. The truth. You gave them closure. You gave them the chance to heal. That's more than anyone could ask for." Isabel looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the file on her desk. She knew he was right. The truth was what had been missing for so long. It had been buried for 25 years, a painful mystery, and now it was out in the open. But the cost of that truth was heavy. It had come with a price that no one could truly understand until they were standing in those shoes, facing the aftermath of something that had been hidden for so long. "So what now?" Isabel asked quietly. "What happens after?" Julien looked out the window for a moment, as though considering the question. "We move on. We keep going. The town keeps going. The family keeps going. It's all we can do, Isabel. It's all any of us can do." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Isabel knew Julien was right, but it didn't make the burden any easier to bear. Moving on wasn't simple. Moving on meant carrying the weight of the case for as long as she was a detective. It meant knowing that the scars of the past were never going to fade fully. It meant accepting that justice could only do so much. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. "I just wish it could have been different," she murmured, more to herself than to Julien. "It could have been," Julien said gently. "But it wasn't. And sometimes that's all we get. A truth that's broken, but still the truth." Isabel took a moment to absorb his words. He was right, of course. The truth wasn't perfect, and sometimes it came at a cost that couldn't be avoided. But she had done her part. She had fought for it. She had brought justice to a family that had waited far too long. And though the journey had been long and brutal, it was over now. For the first time in a long while, Isabel felt like she could breathe. The case was no longer hanging over her like a dark cloud. She had found the answers. She had brought the closure that Claire's family had needed, even if it hadn't been the closure they had imagined. The truth had come at a price, but it was the only price she could offer. "So what now?" Isabel repeated, her eyes meeting Julien's. He smiled again, this time with a little more warmth. "Now we get back to work, I suppose." Isabel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I suppose we do." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, the tension between them slowly easing as they began discussing their next cases, their next moves. The weight of the past still lingered, but for now, Isabel felt like she could let it go, just for a little while. There would be new cases, new mysteries to solve, and with them, new challenges. But for now, there was a strange sense of peace that washed over her. She had done her duty, and that was enough. As Isabel left the precinct later that day, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street. She stood for a moment, looking at the familiar buildings, the place she had walked past so many times, and for the first time, she felt a sense of calm settle within her. The world was still turning, and she had done what she had set out to do. Maybe that was enough. The weeks had continued their steady march forward, the rhythm of life almost mundane in comparison to the whirlwind that had followed the case's conclusion. But in Isabel's mind, time felt strangely suspended, a delicate balance between the past and the present, between what had been and what was yet to come. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed in her, something that would remain long after the final gavel had fallen on the case. She found herself staring out the window of her apartment one evening, the city stretching out below her in the dimming light of dusk. The streets were still busy, the usual hum of activity carrying on as if nothing had shifted. And yet for her, everything had changed. Clare Maro's case had been solved. But the echoes of it, the memories, the questions, lingered in her thoughts like an unfinished song. The haunting images of that barn, the fresh soil, the body uncovered after all those years.